So with that, I would love to welcome our first keynote to the stage. So we have a series of 3 keynotes this morning looking at international, national, and local collaborations. And so I'm honored to first welcome to the stage Fergus Shiel of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, Kevin Hall of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and our host, Ambreen Ali of Central Desi in Jersey. So come on up, welcome.
Hello. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Collaborative Journalism Summit. This is the first time the summit is being held in Washington, D.C., and I think it's only appropriate, given that we are sitting in this incredible seat of power, for us to start the session with these 2 gentlemen and the work that they do to hold that power to account. Fergus Shiel, to my left, is managing editor of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. He's overseen the biggest investigative journalism collaborations in the world. Before that, he was the editor of the tablet edition of The Age, the newspaper in Melbourne, Australia. I tried to practice my pronunciation of Melbourne before I got here.
Very good, well done.
And then Kevin Hall is the North America editor of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And Kevin joined OCCRP in 2021. He oversees the organization's investigations in the US, Mexico, and Canada. And he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who worked at McClatchy, Miami Herald, the Journal of Commerce, and UPI. So as I mentioned, the work that they do is incredibly important on a global scale. And I would say arguably that these gentlemen in the organizations that they work for are behind the most impactful collaborations on the planet. From the Panama Papers, the FinCEN files, Pandora Papers, just to name a few, these investigations have caused top politicians to be impeached, to lose elections, countries to change their laws, launch investigations, and financial institutions to face greater scrutiny and accountability for the covert monetary traffic that occurs around the world and continues to this day. And when we talk about collaborations on a global scale, we're talking about massive collaborations. So the Pandora Papers included 151 media organizations, 600 journalists working in 177 countries, overseen by ICIJ. So we get to learn a little bit today about how you do collaboration at that scale. And it's an incredible opportunity. When I was doing a little background research on this, I was really excited to see that USAID, after the Pandora Papers came out, wrote an 84-page report on kleptocracy. And there were some really juicy quotes for us journalists in there. So one of the things that the report said was that supporting investigative journalism is often the single best possible investment in the development of a country beset by repressive kleptocracy. Like, how cool is that, right? Independent reporting that reveals the truth about corruption provides crucial information and motivation that citizens and authorities need in order to make government serve the people. And the report also references the collaboration between these organizations and the other media organizations that were part of that. It says that while newsrooms traditionally guard their scoops from competing journalists, collaborators on ICIJ projects radically share findings with each other over secure channels to build on each other's work before publishing. So I kind of want to start there and ask you, Fergus, is collaborating in this way radical?
I think philosophically it is. It sort of upends the traditional journalism model of hoarding information to yourself in the pursuit of a scoop. What we do is completely the opposite. We work together for months or years in order to and share every piece of information that we come up with to produce the best stories. So that is a radical departure from the tradition. The second thing, the benefit of it rather is substantial, not only in terms of impact, because if you want to change the world, and ICIJ's motto is stories that rock the world, and our intention with every project we do is to change the world. And With Pandora Papers, we helped to produce the Enablers Act, which is going to transform the whole money laundering sphere. With FinCEN files, we helped with the Transparency Act, which is similarly is going to transform. It would literally transform the world and transform the way money moves around the world and who has to account for that money moving around the world. What we set out to do is to examine broken systems, to show how those systems can be improved for the benefit of the world, but we don't for a moment contemplate that we can do it alone. So the huge benefit of collaboration, the impetus for it is that reporters in their own countries have the best knowledge of their own countries. So we cannot tell somebody like Ignace in Benin what matters in Benin, or Guillermo in Uruguay, what matters in Uruguay, or Pavla in the Czech Republic. We don't for a moment presume that we know as much about Brazil or Ireland or New Zealand as the people who are living there, and that's why collaboration matters so much to us.
Yeah, and Kevin, I should mention, shares that 2017 Pulitzer Prize as the lead U.S. partner in the Panama Papers, the earth-shattering, I would say, Panama Papers. Kevin, would work like that even be possible without collaboration?
Absolutely not. And since this is the crossfire stage, am I supposed to throw something insulting at ICIJ now and take a dialogue from there? No, I mean...
We're collaborators, not fighters.
It's funny, kind of the evolution since the Panama Papers. I mean, I think the Panama Papers broke the mold. I think in the similar events that I've done with this with Fergus's predecessors, they had always said, the lone wolf model is how they described it. One person has all the information. You can't do that. When Panama Papers, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it had 1.7 terabytes of data around there. It would have taken you more than a lifetime to read every document in there. We're on a project right now that I can't discuss, but I can tell you it's 5 terabytes. It's almost 3 times the size. Imagine navigating something like that, 2 or 3 people. You can't. So you make partners. ICIJ and OCCRP have many of the same partners around the world. They're established newspapers in Europe and Africa and South America, and it's a growing pool, but a pool fairly limited, of people who specialize in this, and then we all collaborate together. And the idea is you can't do this stuff by yourself. You need other eyes who know their own countries and regions better. We all put out a better product as a result of that. In my case here in North America, my job is to try to find smaller news organizations and try to pull them into our international network. It's a little distinct from what Fergus does. It was more internationally focused, I think. We're trying to give a little more outreach to smaller outlets, say in Utah or Buffalo or places like that, and connect them to our global network. We have a proprietary database that allows anybody who joins it, and a lot of you are free to join it. There's a whole free component that is not unlimited access, but it's access to most of the important databases, where you can go in and see if your guy locally might have an offshore. Some of our data points to ICIJ's databases, and there are just a lot of ways now that you can connect a small town in Canada or the United States to the global corruption network and find out real details. And that's kind of exciting. It would have been impossible without the Panama Papers.
Let's talk about how that works. We have a lot of collaborators here in the audience, and maybe they're not used to collaborating at your scale, but definitely experts in that. So I think it would be helpful to hear kind of what role you play, and maybe you can talk about that in the lens of some of these important collaborations that you've done recently.
Kevin makes a very good point. The collaboration overcomes the tyranny of distance, tyranny of language, and the tyranny of complexity. So collaboration is, on a grand scale, like the projects that we do, is the way to do it is really simple. It seems complex from the outside, but it's really simple. So I'll take Pandora Papers, for example. We had 11.9 million documents. So what you do at 11.9 million documents, how can you possibly sift 11.9 million documents when you're an organization, in ICIJ's case, that's 100 times smaller than the New York Times? So the obvious way to do it is to initially troll those to find out which countries they impact upon. And so the very first thing we do is we see which countries we need to reach out to. The second thing we do is we store the documents in a way that people can access them around the world. ICIJ is slightly odd in that we're almost a data company, almost an IT company, and a journalism company at the same time. So we have the capacity to store, at the moment we have something like 100 million documents in our system. And the great advantage that we have is that people can read all those documents at the same time. So people can come around from the all across the world and fish in those documents 24/7. So the first thing I would say to you is, if you want to do collaboration and it's based on documents, find out, have a really simple way that people can read those documents around the clock. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could be a Google Drive, or it could be, but something that everyone can access at the same time. The second thing that you need, and again, it's not rocket science. It's really simple. It's just somewhere where people can work. Now that could be a Facebook page. If you don't have a complicated internal system, where people can share their information, set up a Facebook page and let them work there. Make it a closed page, and then people can use it. So there you have two advantages. One is that people can read the data all the time and can work all the time and can share information all the time. The third one is you want confidential communications, so WhatsApp or Signal are good, Telegram, so that you can send messages that nobody is going to read. And then lastly, the most important thing is you need a network of collaborators that you trust. In our case, we have the good fortune that we've built up a network over the last 20 years. In the last 3 weeks, I started a project, and I think I brought on about 100 reporters in 26 countries, and it took me 2.5 weeks. And that is because I can ring them, they know who I am, they trust me. So without trust, you can't do anything. With trust, you can change the world.
Yeah, along the lines, and we have our own motto too, and both of our mottos, I think, are a little more altruistic, right? Ours is it takes a network to fight a network, and these criminal gangs and corruption have criminal networks, and we try to organize journalists in a like-minded way to kind of combat them one-on-one like that. A little different than all the news fit to print, which seems a little old now given the history of the Iraq War and all that, and sitting on information for a book that the public should have known. So with that dig aside, we're voluntary nonprofits. I got in trouble with my old employer for making that joke up in Canada once, saying I work for an involuntary nonprofit, and it got back to the CEO, and he didn't find it so funny. But we are, by design, nonprofit organizations, and one of the things that maybe we're a little different from ICIJ in that we do get some of the same funding, but we also do a lot of grant funding for specific topical areas. So whether it's somewhere in Moldova or tobacco or a range of things. So we do a lot of specialized reporting that's somewhat grant driven, and then we have the broader anti-corruption initiatives. But in our focus is narrowly on crime and corruption. So where a conventional media organization wants eyeballs and how many hits did you get on this page, which of course we welcome that too, but our mission, we're judged by whether or not the reporting leads to an action, right? Can a prosecutor come in and bring a case? Can someone do a Magnitsky filing? Can transparency, bring something in London or here in the U.S.? So that's a little bit of a different way of doing business. And then the challenge now, in my sense, here in North America, one of the things people think is crazy when I say it is that corruption is legal in the United States, right? So think about what we've just seen with the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's travel. That would be considered corruption in almost anywhere else in the world. It's not in the United States. It's part of a process and the dark money and things of that. And I don't mean this in some sort of radical way. It's just matter of fact. A lot of things that would be treated as subversive or non-transparent in the rest of the world is legal here in the United States, and it's why the U.S. doesn't do well on the transparency rankings, or does more poorly than you would suspect in the transparency rankings. So a little off topic, but
That's so interesting, and it reminds me when I was reading about the Pandora Papers that it said that on your website that the U.S. itself is a tax haven, and I think when we think about tax havens, we think about far-flung islands and places like that. But it's so interesting to learn that even in the U.S., so many of these loopholes exist. We talked a little bit about both your organizations. You also work closely together on a lot of investigations. So what does that collaboration between organizations look like, and how does that get initiated, and how does it play out?
Okay, it's probably best to give you an example, 2 examples maybe. So the first one, China Cables. We did a project that uncovered the foundations for the Uyghur camps. It was, we had the first telegrams showing the way that the Chinese were using apps to detain thousands of people and thousands of Uyghurs and funnel them into camps, and that they were detaining them involuntarily, and it was everything that you feared about the camps. And the difference between what we were reporting and what had been reported before was that it was all in the Chinese government's own words. So if you get such documents, and there are very few documents there, so it wasn't a Pandora Papers. There was in Pandora Papers, as I said, it was 11.9 million records. In the China Cables, it was 5 telegrams and 1 separate document. So it was tiny, you could fit it in a folder, and it sat under my bed for quite a while as I worried about the Chinese government coming to visit me. The thing there, so you have these Chinese documents, so you have to work out what are you going to do with them. Firstly, you have to make sure that they are what you think they are, because if they're not what you think they are, you're in deep trouble. If for a moment you get it wrong, if you get it wrong, that's your reputation gone. If your reputation is gone, you don't get it back. It's all over. So for an organization like us, we take on oligarchs and boligarchs and kings and presidents and prime ministers. We've toppled 4 prime ministers. We've discomfited a king, several kings. We've, had more than, I think something like $1.5 billion was returned to exchequers because of the Panama Papers alone. We've taken on some of the biggest criminals in the world, the biggest Ponzi schemers in the world. And so in order to do that, you have to get it right. If you don't get it right, you're in deep trouble. So what you have to do then, going back to China documents, is you have to select your partners cautiously, because you know that when you're doing it, you're going to have to work confidentially. So you cannot select a partner to work with you on that unless you know that they are trustworthy and that they are not going to leak the documents or go to the Chinese government or, commit some other faux pas. And so what we did very simply in that case, was we went around the world, I went around the world, and contacted, I think it was about 28 media organizations that had speciality in China. And so when you do, each project is different. So you don't have to have the same partners in each project, but you do have to base it on geography, language, and expertise. And in the case of the China Cables, we need people who could speak Chinese, who had seen Chinese documents before, because we had to work out if they were the real thing, and could handle them in a sensitive way that didn't endanger our sources and that didn't spook the Chinese government too early. And I think that kind of sums up each and every project. If you have a project that's about Africa, you obviously need African expertise. And this is, with OCCRP, we have the great privilege of working with OCCRP, because one of the things that OCCRP is expert on is Eastern Europe. We have some expertise in Eastern Europe, but OCCRP's expertise goes beyond ours, and also places like Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. OCCRP is absolutely brilliant on, and their new boss is a gun when it comes to those countries.
I'll take that as a cue to say nice things about Miranda Petrucic, who is our new top editor, and she has come up from within OCCRP. OCCRP was founded almost 16 years ago in Bosnia. It had focused originally on the Balkans and to a lesser extent and more recently under her leadership on the stands, central, what would be called Eurasia, I guess, more broadly, that in the former Soviet republics has been our strong point, but we've expanded pretty aggressively into Latin America. But Russia and its environments continue to be our strongest suit. As Fergus has mentioned, we are on the organizations of persona non grata, which is more than just non grata nowadays with how Putin's behavior has changed towards journalists. So security is a real issue in both of our organizations. China is a massive story waiting to be told, and I think all of us news organizations, both for-profit and non-profit, are all in the same boat of trying to figure out how to staff up, how to find Mandarin speakers. Security is a real issue. One of the kids, I was at a Columbia University workshop with prospective journalists, and the kid who I thought would have been just a slam dunk for us, a perfect fit, really bright kid, was worried about his family back home. He had no intentions of going back to China, but the reality that association with us could harm his family, those are real things that we have to deal with on a day in, day out. And the Times and the Post have to deal with it with their translators and staffers and things of that sort. But Miranda is fearless, and I think she's a perfect leader. We have grown. Like many organizations that grow quickly, you're struggling to kind of keep the trains running on time because we've grown so much. We have about reputation, to follow up on Fergus's point, it takes years to build a reputation, minutes to lose it, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. We have a pretty rigorous fact-checking process, as they do. We both do a lot of footnoting. We tend to be much longer stories that go into detail because of the idea that we're going to bring someone behind us to have judicial action. So where a newspaper might focus more on a narrative form, I think both of us organizations try to get as much information out in a story as well, because there are a lot of elements that would go into a prosecution or a human rights investigation and things of the sort. But I like to joke that our fact-checking process is like a colonoscopy without anesthesia. So it's unlike a conventional newsroom process. It's very, very rigorous.
I can imagine, and I hear both of you talking about how important trust is and how there are very serious risks involved, in the work that you do, and the people who collaborate with you, especially those that are in country, face a lot of backlash, when the people in power are being told, that their secrets are getting out. So how do you manage that piece of it, the legal and kind of the safety concerns that all your collaborators kind of share with you when you work on these investigations?
Thanks for that metaphor, Kevin. So, yeah, it is, Ambreen. It's a constant worry. So with China Cables, we had somebody who was arrested in Beijing in the middle of the project, and we delayed the project until they got out of jail. Because we didn't know if they had been arrested because of us or not. So that's one example. With Pandora Papers, many of our colleagues, both our colleagues in Russia, fled the country. So just before Pandora Papers came out, iStories, which is run by Roman Schleinoff and Roman Anin, who are good colleagues of ours, did a story that was a preamble to the Pandora Papers. They knew that when that story went out that they would be at risk. Sure enough, they were at risk, and so 16 of them fled Russia in one weekend with the assistance of OCCRP and ourselves and others. And they haven't gone back. They're not back in Russia yet. Hopefully they will be one day. And this goes on all around the world. So we have Venezuelan reporters who are in Miami, not in Venezuela. We have Nicaraguan reporters who are in Costa Rica, not in Nicaragua. With each and every project we do, sadly, very sadly, you see essentially the forced migration of reporters from their own countries to others. You also see two other things that are alarming. One is news organizations that have worked with us refusing to publish the stories that they've done with us. So we saw that in Panama, where our Panamanian partner worked for 2 years on Pandora Papers, and then it's her own publication refused to publish it. So that was really disconcerting. She's now left that publication. We're not going to work with that publication again. And the stories, this is the great thing about collaboration, those stories were published elsewhere. Stories that weren't published in Bolivia were published next door to in Peru and elsewhere. Stories that couldn't go out in Liberia went out in Ghana. So collaboration is it's like a heat shield. It protects reporters, enables them, allows you to do more complex work, and it allows you to do one other thing which is really striking and which you don't think about a lot. So most of you here, if you know anything about Australia, I lived there a long time, for years, or Ireland, where I'm from, you will think they're sort of Western democracies. They've got the rule of law, they've got good newspapers. But what you won't appreciate is that both there and in UK, there are these brutal libel laws. They're so depressingly restrictive that story after story doesn't get published. So that publications literally can't publish the truth because they will be sued and they'll lose. And the great advantage of collaboration, and this I think can work anywhere, the great advantage of collaboration is it allows you to get past libel laws too, because you can publish a story about Australia in America and then you can bypass the libel laws.
That's incredible. You would think that I planted that question, but you heard it. Collaboration is the antidote in this environment. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, but I want to add, I guess this might be a good place to segue to the SLAP slides too, but we have a movie out right now. We have a documentary division, and we actually have a documentary out called The Killing of a Journalist, which was our Slovakian reporter, Jan Kuciak. I believe he worked with you guys too, right?
Yeah, Jan was great, and Pavla, we brought down the Czech Prime Minister with Pavla.
Yeah, so we, it commemorates now 5 years since his passing. The businessman who is widely believed to have killed him managed to just get off, notwithstanding the pressure from the movie and the international attention. But these are front and center risks is the point I'm trying to make, that it really is. In the Panama Papers and the aftermath, we know the story of Daphne Caruana and that terrible end that she met in Malta. And these are very real dangers. And then recently, our Africa bureau chief out of South Africa had to help, I believe it was in Botswana. One of our guys had a 24-hour notice of he was going to be killed, and we had to get him and his entire family across the river and out of the country, I believe in Congo, actually. And quite a harrowing event as well. So it's not the kind of daily hassles you have in a newsroom about, did I get a parking ticket or something? I mean, it's real serious. And your original question on security, it's on the front end of every conversation we have. So when we get in a big project, we don't wait till like the very end to think, okay, now are we going to get people out of the country? What are we going to do? It's on the front end of the planning, because so much of this stuff really is life or death type reporting.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Jan Kuciak, you should see OCCRP's film. It's really chilling. It's amazing. It's corruption, and it's what you don't think of corruption. You don't think the police chief is going to be corrupt. You don't think the lawyers are going to be corrupt. You don't think the judge is going to be corrupt. But when you see it in action, you see how Jan died, a young reporter, and his girlfriend shot dead by assassins. You can see corruption before your very eyes in a visceral way in a Western democracy. And it's the same with Daphne Caruana Galicia, whose son Matthew worked with ICIJ for years. You can see, Malta, a beautiful Mediterranean island in Europe. Again, you don't presume that corruption is endemic, but it was. And this is why the work that OCCRP does and the work that ICIJ does is so important, because you know, to use a hoary old cliche, shining a light in dark places is often the only thing you can do in the face of manifest evil that is enabled by the entire structure of government.
I want to allow everybody to ask questions. If you have them, please just line up at the microphone in the center, and we'll start taking those questions.
Yeah,
and while people do queue up,
Can we do the
I'm not
slides
sure
real
if we
quick,
have the
'cause
slides. I think Joe will do his best. I can see him up there. Okay, great.
Yeah, because this is something that is relevant to what they do day in and day out.
Yep. So next slide is there a specific one, Kevin?
Let's just keep going until we get.
We'll just go through them
slide.
slowly. Okay. And I just want to ask, for everybody that's in the room, if they want to get involved in some of these kind of mass scale collaborations and investigations, what is kind of the way to get started? Is it just reaching out to organizations, or is there anything they can do to kind of start to investigate what's going on in their local towns? And
yeah, I guess the answer, Ambreen, is to do what matters most to you. So, I mean, I really don't see a huge benefit to somebody in Utah working with ICIJ. It doesn't make sense unless there is a particular angle that stretches beyond Utah. I think what really matters now is that everyone does journalism that matters for their own communities. It's essential. I can't, there's whole parts of the United States that don't have any journalism anymore, and this is the same in parts of Australia now that there's no journalism. So if you're getting up every day and doing work in your state and collaborating with people in towns near you, that is of far more importance and significance to the world than what we do. It is in your world. It's really vital that you keep the flame alive in your towns and your cities and your states. If what you're seeing goes beyond your state, that's great. Then you can collaborate with the next state. If it goes internationally, then of course, please call us. If you have a data set that you think crosses borders, if you feel that there is work that can be done to shine a light in your area that reaches across the world to an offshore jurisdiction or to a faulty medical implant or whatever, please call us. We talk to people all the time. I talk to, 5 or 6 people a week. And typically what we do is we ask whoever it is what the story is, and then we try to help. I try to help. I say, well, this story isn't for us, but it might be for your neighbor. This story isn't for us, but it might be for the Washington Post. This is how you do this story. This is what I would suggest you do. So I'm always happy to chat to reporters around the world, around the country and around the world, but, genuinely I feel that the state of journalism is in such a powerless state that if you're just getting up every day and you're doing it, you deserve rich congratulations.
And here's the good news in all that, and keep us on the speed dial, and it's okay if you put us right ahead of ICIJ on the speed dial, I don't know, but we'll, but in all seriousness, we both refer people to each other regularly, and the same thing if it's something that we think we can't handle, but somebody else is a better fit, ProPublica or a cyber publication or whatever, we all do that every day. What I wanted to briefly mention, the slides aren't showing up there, so we'll just do it this way. Everybody know what a SLAP is, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. We've got dozens of suits against our people all around the world. They're never going to win. The idea is to inflict pain, costs, etc. So we've launched a new initiative where we have something called Reporters Shield. And it's a new nonprofit here in the United States, and it's we provide, it's kind of a form of self-insurance so that smaller media outlets in the U.S. and abroad can insure themselves against these and get a measure of legal protection. We work with the Cyrus Vance Center up in New York, and I took some notes just in case the slides didn't go up there. So basically, basically what you need to do to be eligible, you need to be legally registered, you need to have nonprofit status, voluntary nonprofit, and be independent of political influence, and clear lines between editorializing and reporting. So we're not going to back you up if you're a hate group, pushing some idea or whatever. But for legitimate news organizations, smaller news organizations, particularly in Latin America and Eastern Europe, but here in the United States as well, because the Aspen, is anybody here from Aspen? Look in the audience here. The Aspen paper was nearly shut down on a lawsuit from a Russian who was upset about the use of the word oligarch associated with his name, and pretty much bankrupted this publication, forced out all the editorial leadership. So these kind of things contributed to the idea of creating this mechanism of self-funding. We're a nonprofit, I believe it's either Maine or Vermont, where the USAID helps fund some of this for the non-U.S. companies, media outlets who are trying to get a measure of protection, and we have private donors for the U.S. component. But if you're a U.S. publication and you're being threatened with these nuisance suits that are trying to bleed you, talk to us, because the whole idea is to provide this measure of protection, because it's very easy to bankrupt a news outlet these days.
That's great. I think I saw somebody stand up and sit back down. So if you have a question, please come forward and you can ask it.
I was curious to hear more about how you do trust building, because I think about, like, I work in a mid-size local nonprofit newsroom, and if I want to collaborate with another newsroom on the other side of town, like, I got to build some trust, and I speak the same language they do, and we can go have lunch in person. But, like, you find out you've got some story and you need a journalist in Mogadishu. Like, how do you start building trust with someone who's a total unknown to you like that?
Firstly, we train them. So that's the first thing. So we train them in our systems. And then once people are trained, they have a expectation from the outset. We have very limited, we don't expect a lot of people, except for that they publish at the same time and they publish ethically. So that's it. So we don't interfere in people's editorial direction. But what we can do, and we're in this great good fortune, is it's not a one-night stand. It's a long-term relationship, and in the same way as in a long-term relationship, you build trust as you wouldn't in a one-night stand. You can, so we work together privately in something called the iHub, which is not unlike Facebook, but it's our own, and over months. And so you can see immediately if somebody is working. You can see if they're working in a way that makes sense, or if they, some of their concepts are off beam, and you can chat to them. But I would say, in relation to trust, that we've been immensely fortunate, and I can only think of 2 instances where it went wrong. So 3 instances. So one was where a corporate intelligence guy got access to a BBC team, and tried to work on an offshore project, and was booted out after 15 days because he was sprung. So that was it. He was planning to sell our documents. That was one. The second one was where a reporter handed over some of our documents to a lawyer. Now, it was an advocacy lawyer, so it wasn't critical, it wasn't egregious, but it still was beyond the pale as far as we were concerned. It was not acceptable. So that was the second one. And the third one, which was very, very, very annoying, was somebody published a rival project a week out from one of our projects and didn't tell us. And as a consequence of that, we have not worked with them again.
I'll touch on the first part of your question, and it's how do you vet people, for instance. I had an example recently of someone who I had worked with in the past for quite a while, who I thought was more like a blogger, wasn't a formal publication, but was a researcher / blogger type, very good, had actually given me information that turned into some award-winning series when I was still at the Miami Herald. And as I went to bring this person into a broader project, I had to do a little more due diligence on them. And at that point, I found I had ties to a political family back home. And even though this person wasn't part of that, it was enough. Appearance does matter. And oftentimes perception is more important than reality. And we just thought it just wasn't worth the risk of being accused of having a political influence or a political axe to grind. So that would be a case. We do vetting, but what we do is try to establish beforehand. We hope to have relationships. So like I said, this Aleph, if you go to our website, OCCRP.org, think of it as OCCRP without the A. And our name is an accusation, so if you get a call from us, worry. But in all seriousness, this Aleph is our database. We think of it as, you got a tip of the iceberg, we're everything underneath the iceberg, whether it's California corporate records or Luxembourg business registry or the French land records. We've got a whole range, just massive amount of data there. And that's open to journalists of all sorts. You don't have to be collaborating with us in a project to get access to this. So I would encourage you to go to the website, fill out the form, and get access to Aleph. ICIJ publishes a stripped down version of their data too. The reason neither of us put out just raw form, here's all our data, is because it has Social Security numbers, passports. You don't want to be the guy who gave somebody a home address for someone who, a rival goes and offs them, or that, somebody, breaks into their house and holds them hostage or some horrible thing like that. So we're all very sensitive that this is sensitive information. And oftentimes we can't share an actual document. We might be able to tell you a little bit about it, but one of the reasons you have to be real careful with these documents, and ICIJ does a really good job of patrolling this, is if I give you a document and then you use it in a lawsuit, and I've never written about, it's not a document that became a journalist product, then that's open to discovery, and you can get ICIJ or us pulled into some other lawsuit. So we limit the access to documents to people who are using it for journalistic purposes. And that's a real sensitive issue. But we work with a lot of interesting people. One great collaboration we did recently, there was a seafood publication out of London. A real bright guy ran a seafood industry type publication, not the kind of normal thing we would collaborate with. But they had information on a Russian Makarov in Jacksonville, Florida, who has massive real estate holdings around the world, was a champion cycler for the Soviet Union before the collapse. We helped him, and Fergus kindly allowed us to share documents with him, and the two organizations together helped him do a really powerful story that ended up resulting down the road in Australia and some other countries imposing sanctions on the guy. The U.S. hasn't, but other countries have. And that's the kind of collaboration where we couldn't have just given somebody a document. Because if we're not involved, then we run the risk of being sued. So it's got to be a journalistic project.
I imagine that's the hardest part of the job, is figuring out who you trust, how you manage, trust, how you manage the information that you have. We are about to wrap up. If there's a last question, we can take that.
Yes, given the size of the databases that you have in place, I'm wondering what role AI might play in helping to sort through the material.
I'm so glad you asked that. I had that on my list and really wanted to ask too. Your new collaborator, AI, tell us about that.
We do use AI at the minute. We use it for set functions. One thing that it helps is, Kevin mentioned passports. When you have a large amount of documents, a vital first task is to make sure that the person that you're identifying is the person that you say they are. And this may sound simple, but it's really not simple, because you can get things very badly wrong by having a Mr. say Malafiev, the oligarch, and a Mr. Malafiev who is a taxi driver in Moscow, and mixing them up. It's absolutely treacherous. So there are countries in the world which absolutely, are at the forefront of our mind all the time because their names are so similar that they throw up this issue. So Middle Eastern names. There's so many people share the same name, so many Mohammeds. In Russia, the same thing. And China, it's absolutely perilous to get it wrong. And so what AI can do is go through these documents and throw up the passports for people. And once you have the passport related to the offshore company, you know it's the right person. And once you know it's the right person, you're almost there. And so that is this kind of task that AI can do very simply, which we can't. But AI is a double-edged sword. AI could bring to its knees the whole journalism project. And if I was a young reporter, I would be worried about AI because AI can do things like cover sports and cover council, cover lots of things that young reporters do to train themselves on. AI can do instantly, and you're already seeing copy editors and others lose their job because of it. So I'm not overwhelmingly enthused by AI.
I'll just briefly close by saying Paul Radu, our co-founder, did his night fellowship on AI in the newsroom, a little ahead of these chat GT and all that, but it's been front and center in our focus, and it's a double-edged sword. And re-emphasize what Fergus said about the dangers of not knowing a name. In the Panama Papers, we were working on a guy named Michael Del Vecchio, if you remember, and it was kind of a middleman enabler. He was in Malta, he was in Mexico, he was in Spain, and he was a former Air Force guy with a specialty in ballistic missiles. Well, there was another Michael Del Vecchio who spelled his name the same way, who had the same middle name and worked at Northrop Grumman and had been a former CIA person. So for almost the entire project, we were working on an assumption that this is the guy who's a former CIA guy who's now doing, middleman and helping set up shell companies. And it turned out it was two guys with the exact same name, same fields roughly, and not the same guy. We caught it in time, but boy, that would have been,
That's amazing. All right, well, thank you all so much for being so attentive. Thank you, both of you, for giving us your time today.
Thank you. Thank you.